You're now on the road beyond. I'm Todd Duplantis. Welcome, Facebook Live. Welcome to our show. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight. Ike McFadden returning to the show. He took a week off last week. Ike, it's good to see you again. I see you're still alive. Did you catch any cryptids on your fishing expedition last week? Well, I see you caught not knowing how to use your mic because you left that.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it depends on your definition of success. Certainly, we went out on a boat, and certainly we got sunburned. I got a couple of fuzzy pictures of a pelican, I think. I don't know if I sent that to you.
No.
In terms of actually finding anything particularly unusual, no. It was a failed expedition, but we'll try again next year, I think.
Okay. Well, we're going to depend on that next year. You know, the summer season is upon us. You know, people are getting out, going on vacation again. A lot of people go to our national parks, and I've been following this story or this theory for the past several years. It's been popping up in the news. The reality is people are going into our national parks and they're disappearing. The government knows about it. The National Park Service knows about it. The park rangers know about it. They're not finding people. They're going in the parks. They're disappearing. They're disappearing near groups. They walk one way. They're gone. And this has been happening literally for decades now. Have you heard of this?
You know, actually, I have, and I have read a couple of stories of particular, like sort of not just disappearances, but strange sightings. But to be skeptical as usual. I mean, what is the total square mileage of the U.S. national parks? And I would just imagine a certain amount of people just fall off cliffs and get eaten by mountain lions.
Well, we're going to hear the stories behind it because I'm very excited about tonight's show. We've got a guest on the show. His name is Steve Stockton. He's a veteran outdoorsman, author, and has been investigating the unexplained for over 35 years. Originally from the mountains of East Tennessee, you're familiar with those, Ike. Steve has traveled all over the country, many parts of the world, and now makes his home in Portland, Oregon, near the wilds of Bigfoot country in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, that's right. I am familiar with Tennessee, fortunately. And from his early years, Steve has had what could be called strange and frightening experiences with the paranormal and the unexplained. So these encounters led him to search for some answers, only to discover that it wasn't always easy to find them.
Steve is author of several books, including Strange Things in the Woods. His latest, the series on national parks, the first one out, National Park Mysteries and Disappearances, Volume 1, The Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Please welcome Steve Stockton to the show. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
You know, I am fascinated about this whole topic because I've been actually following this in the news and on shows for the past several years. But what the heck is going on in the national parks? People are going in there, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and they're not returning. This has been going on for some time.
Yeah, it happens in all national parks, some more so than others. And there aren't any hard and fast answers. Nobody's able to give a clear, concise answer as to exactly what. There's all kinds of different theories. But you're asking about the size of some of those national parks. Well, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which is also the most visited national park in the country. Even with everything going on last year, it saw 12.1 million visitors, whereas Yosemite was in the single million digits. It covers over 500,000 square acres. So there's a lot of wilderness out there. And like I mentioned, there are plenty of opportunities for people to fall off of cliffs or run into some kind of natural predator. But with things like that, there's usually something left behind. I mean, we're talking about people that have disappeared without a trace of anything.
Yeah.
I mean, with an animal attack, you're going to have disturbance in the ground cover. You're going to have blood. You're going to have clothing and shoes and things like that. And they don't eat every single bit of everything.
So, well, let me ask you this. Of what you've studied, is there any commonality across things, or who exactly is disappearing? Is it men, women, children, big, small, just everything? Or?
There's a little bit of everything, although there are some commonalities in there. It tends to be either people that are on the autism scale or people that are very, very well educated. They're more likely, those two ends of the spectrum there are more likely to go missing. People wearing red are more likely to go missing, which that's strange. You think somebody wearing red would be easier to spot. People of Germanic descent. there's been a lot more of those than any other nationality that have gone missing. So there is just some odd things there. There seems to be something to do with either being the first in line or the last in line if you're in a group. So that kind of makes sense, particularly if you get left behind or if you walk ahead. And berry fields and or berry patches and boulder fields are another place that's common for people to go missing.
Well, what do you make of that? I mean, that's kind of an odd collection of things. Autism, highly educated, wearing red. I mean, do you have any theories on this?
There's a ton. I don't have any real one theory, but I can see where all of them fit in it. There's UFOs, there's Bigfoot, there's our government, there's alien government trade-off. There's some kind of like a black bag deal. One of the theories that's getting a lot of traction lately is with the Fae, the fairy people. If you look back at a lot of the legends, even before the Native Americans and stuff, just about every culture has those legends of the fairy people. And you kind of get people will giggle at you or smirk about that, but then the same people will go right along and believe that maybe it's Bigfoot or UFOs taking people. So I don't see that much of a leap in faith between one or the other.
You know, Ike and I are very familiar with Tennessee and that area. I go up with my family up to Chattanooga every summer and spend a lot of time up there on top of Lookout Mountain. It's funny you mentioned fairy people because fairies have translated into leprechauns and, you know, gnomes, fairies, they're all seem about the same. And on Lookout Mountain, for example, there's an attraction up there and their main draw to the attraction, not only the rocks, called Rock City, but the gnomes. You know, and I guess that legend still stretches across because you hear shreds of maybe there's some truth in all this.
Yeah, and I know what you're talking about there. I grew up in Knoxville, used to go to Chattanooga a lot, and the gnomes and stuff that they have there at Rock City used to scare the daylights out of me when I was a kid. There's just something creepy about the way they're presented there.
Yeah, absolutely. Want to ask you about some of the most intriguing cases with these people that are disappearing. First off, before I get to that, let me backtrack just a bit. How difficult was it for you to get this information from the National Park Service and the government? Because from what I've heard, it's not an easy experience. And do they want to talk about this or disclose this information?
They don't want to talk about it. And one of the biggest reasons is the tourism dollars.
Yeah.
Great Smoky Mountains National Park, for example, that's a huge tourist area with Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge. And to a lesser degree, Sevierville, where you have Dollywood and things like that. So if you tell people, you know, don't come to the mountains because something's taking people, then your tourism dollars are going to immediately drop. And that's what the whole area depends on. Otherwise, economically, it's a very poor part of Appalachia. And without that, I mean, you're talking loss of tens of thousands of jobs.
So do you have any particular cases or stories that you would highlight as either particularly well documented or just exceptionally unusual, other than just people disappearing?
One of the ones that I hate to say a favorite for a missing person case, but one of the ones that I've followed the longest is the Dennis Martin disappearance. That happened, I was about the same age as Dennis. I was a few months younger than him. He disappeared Father's Day in 1969. And that one just kind of stuck with me. I lived in the area at the time. It was all over the news. And that was the first time that I kind of got my head around that, you know, sometimes kids disappear. Sometimes things happen that you can't account for.
Yeah.
Father's Day, 1969, he was in the park with his father and his grandfather and his brother. They were in the Cades Cove area and then decided to hike up to an area called Spence Field. Met another family up there, also named the Martins, which is a little Fortean type coincidence, which are all throughout this case. And they had sons as well. So the two Mr. Martins shook hands and thought maybe it'd be the good ideas for their kids to play together. And while they were playing, they were either playing hide and go seek or they were trying to sneak up and scare the adults, depending on which story you hear. But Mr. Martin observed Dennis go behind a clump of brush for his hiding spot. And then later he noticed, you know, the other boys are out. He doesn't see Dennis anywhere. He asked them, you know, what happened to Dennis? And they're like, we haven't seen him since we started playing this game. So he goes right to the clump of brush, walks around behind it, eventually goes into it. No Dennis. That was the last time he ever saw his son, was when he saw him step behind that clump of brush. Well, shortly thereafter, he sends the grandfather down to the ranger station to get help. Dennis's father runs down the Appalachian Trail for a couple of miles, which it's just right there. It passes through the edge of Spence Field. And that kicked off the largest, at that time, and probably up until now, the largest manhunt that the Smokies have ever seen. Thousands of volunteers, search and rescue, dogs, even had the Green Berets from, I think they were from Fort Campbell, that came in and assisted. And no trace was ever found. I think there was maybe one footprint that they thought might be Dennis, but some of the searchers were Boy Scouts who were wearing the same type, or Cub Scouts who were wearing the same type of shoe, and they thought it could have been attributed to them. And that's been over 50 years ago now. Absolutely no trace. Just where did he go? And that was what I couldn't get my head around as a kid. We lived about an hour away from the Smokies at the time. In my little 5-year-old mind, I thought, well, that's not that far away. Maybe he wandered down here. We lived out in the country in West Knox County. I got out on my Schwinn Stingray and rode up and down the country road looking for him. Thought he might be in the bushes or something. And I still have a couple of scrapbooks full of clippings from the local papers and stuff. Just one of those that stuck with me. And that was the first real missing person case that got its hooks in me, if you will. And then,
Steve,
go ahead.
I was going to, have you heard of cases where people have disappeared and maybe later they found the body in weird states, maybe not decayed, or anything strange along those lines?
Yeah, that tends to happen somewhat often, where they'll find somebody that's been missing for maybe months, but the body only appears to have been deceased for a few days.
Right.
So where were they in that time? Another one that's happened before is they found people in boulder fields, like I mentioned, that look like they've fallen from a considerable height, although where the boulder field is, there's no height to fall from. Now, that kind of coincides. There's a Native American legend. I know the Algonquins in New England have it, and I think some of the Western tribes do as well, where there are rocks that can open up and swallow people and then later spit them back out. So if you think about that, suspend disbelief. If a rock could open up and swallow you, crush you, and then spit you back out, you might appear like you'd fallen from a great height since you were crushed. So frightening to think about.
So now I understand you've got a couple of books out. Are these related in some way? Do they follow a theme? Are they following up on different levels of investigation, or what can you tell us about that?
The new series that just came out, the National Park Mysteries and Disappearances, it will have some of the more prominent or more unusual disappearances. This is volume 1. It's just the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And it's not just disappearances, it's a little bit of everything, kind of a mixed bag. Also has local legends and lore, ghost stories, haunted areas of the park, and disappearances. I have those in there too. Just a little bit of things that have gone on in the Smokies. There's some famous murders and things that have gone on up there. It's probably not very tourist friendly, but it's things that have happened.
Right. Fascinating. Are there things, you have a previous book called Strange Things in the Woods. Does that tie into people disappearing? How does that, tell us a bit about that.
Not so much in that one. Strange Things in the Woods it's a collection of stories that I collected from other people. And the way that came about as a kid, I was a late in life, unexpected baby. My only sibling was 17 years older than me. So when I was a kid and my parents would go visit their friends, it was like, going to visit my grandparents or something, because people would have no children my age or anything. So I'd have to sit and listen to the adults. The only time there was a lull in the conversation, I already had this interest in the paranormal. Whoever we were visiting with, I'd say, have you ever seen anything strange in the woods? Have you ever had a weird experience? Have you ever seen a ghost? That sort of thing. And that was how I began collecting those stories. And a lot of people were even reticent to talk about it until they saw that you weren't going to ridicule them or going to make fun of them, that I had a genuine interest in what they had seen or encountered. And then it opened up, and it was amazing, because you get people that would tell you stories that, their spouse might say, well, you never told me that. And, this was the first time sharing it. And I kind of had an epiphany at my grandmother's funeral. She was in Appalachia, what they call a granny witch. she called herself a gypsy witch, but she told fortunes, read tea leaves, coffee grounds, animal entrails, that sort of thing. And she told me a lot of stories and legends and things. And at her funeral, I remember thinking, I've never ever seen her that still before. I mean, obviously, number one, she was deceased, but just she was always doing something, always moving, always talking, worked with her hands constantly. And I thought, every story, every legend, every superstition, every haint booger, whatever story you want to call it, which is vernacular there in the South, it dies right there with her, because none of my cousins or anybody else really in the family had an interest in the stuff like I did. So I thought, well, I'll assume that mantle onto myself. It's up to me to tell these stories. And that's the impetus for my first book.
So let me ask you this. As Todd mentioned, we're both sort of all familiar with this same part of the mountains of Tennessee, the Smokies and so forth. And generally speaking, especially when you get in more rural areas, people are fairly private generally. And I mean, I would ask, what has been the reaction to some of your books? Is there any local pushback, or are people happy you're bringing this stuff to the attention of people? Or
for the most part, I haven't heard of any pushback. Of course, I'm far removed from that area. I only go back and visit every now and then, although I do have plans to move back at some point. But for the most part, it's been a good reaction. On social media and things, I'll get people who contact me and say, I've heard that story, or my grandmother had a similar story, or I'm, from the area, and thanks for talking about this. It tends to make people a little more comfortable about talking about their experiences in the area. It's just, particularly the Southern Appalachians there, it just has such a history of folklore, and it has a big oral tradition, but it's usually just from one community to the next. You can go over in the next holler, as they say, and maybe hear a different story or legend. There's some that overlap, and some where you can tell it's kind of the same story, that only the location has changed, but then everywhere is unique. Like every little community has like a crybaby bridge or a lady in white story. There's a haunted graveyard somewhere or something, a haunted house. And that's one of the things I do when I go into an area, particularly that I haven't been to before. I'll seek out the teenagers because they know where all the spooky spots are. And then the oldest people I can find, I'll go and visit like a nursing home and chat with some of those people. They're our older citizens, the elderly, they're just an incredible resource as far as folklore and legends and stuff that's basically untapped. Those stories are more or less forgotten, and I'm trying to change that to a degree too.
Steve, I want to ask you, we had a guest on not that long ago, and he specializes in hunting Bigfoot. He's from Alabama, and I believe he leads something called the Alabama Bigfoot Project or Bigfoot Society. And he kind of, I don't know if Ike remembers this, but we were talking about Bigfoot because he's in the woods a lot, and he just kind of randomly throws out there. And when you're in those woods, some weird things happen within those woods. It's just very well known. And I guess that's what you found growing up really in the woods.
Yeah, absolutely. There's things that defy explanation, and it happens to a lot of people. One of the strangest and most unsettling is the silence. I've had that happen just out in the woods in, not too far from home. I've had it happen in the mountains. I've had it happen out here in Oregon and Washington State when I've been in some of the national and state parks out here, where it's like literally somebody turns down the volume knob and everything goes quiet. You don't hear the wind, you don't hear the birds, you don't hear any rustle of the leaves. It's almost like a deafening silence. And usually that's a signal that something weird has either just happened or is about to happen, or it can also be kind of a caveat to get out of that area.
Now, that is interesting. I've got to say, I've actually had that experience. It was in South Carolina in a rural area years ago, but I was sitting out by a lake, and I remembered it was going through the cycle of you would hear animals moving around and birds, and you could hear footsteps and so forth, and then it would go dead silent for about 10 minutes, and then you would hear it all start up again.
Yeah.
Steve Stockton is his name. He's the author of several books. Steve, where can people find you and your books, especially your new series on the National Park Mysteries and Disappearances?
Oh, thank you. They're available on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold, as my publisher likes for me to say. It's available in ebook and paperback versions. And Strange Things in the Woods is in an audible version and on audio CD as well. The one that just came out, National Park Mysteries and Disappearances. There's a second part to that they've already set up a pre-order for, which I didn't know they were going to do. So that's volume 2, which will cover California to include Joshua Tree, Mount Shasta, and Yosemite, among others.
Steve, we appreciate you joining us on the show, and we'd love to have you back again. We appreciate the work you do, and very fascinating subject. Look for him online, folks. Steve Stockton. Thanks for being here, Steve.
Thanks. I'm coming back anytime. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, Ike, very fascinating. Like I said, I really have followed this subject for the past few years, and it's just boggles the mind. What really gets me, my old reporter instinct is, obviously, Steve kind of brought it to light. The government, especially these park services, they don't want to release all this information because it's going to affect the tourism. But the reality is it's happening, and it's been happening for quite some time.
Well, it's interesting he brought up that silence thing, because that's one of the weirder memories I have is being in that situation. And oddly, I associated it also not just with a change in this, the background noise that just went to silence. It was almost like the humidity changed significantly.
Yeah, right. It's something that I haven't experienced it yet, but I'm certainly going to look for it now, being up on Lookout Mountain every summer. It's something I'll look for in a few months. Ike, I think we're going to move on to the news. We got a couple of interesting stories. You're going to like these. Here's a look at some of the weird, tantalizing, and just plain bizarre stories posted for our partners at the Full Spectrum Project on Facebook. Find them on Facebook, follow them. You'll get some interesting stories. Ike, this first one is about a UFO train crash in something called the Bluegrass Triangle. This comes to us from CalebandLindaPurtle.com. You know their website, CalebandLindaPurtle.com.
Of course, I hang out there all the time.
Exactly. All right. It documents a 2002 incident which allegedly involved where a train was hit by a UFO. According to reports, a CSX train pulling 16,000 tons of coal and freight was headed into Shelbania, Kentucky, rolling along a rock bluff when the conductor saw a string of lights around the bend ahead. He assumed it was an off-schedule oncoming train, so he flashed his brakes and signals when all of a sudden his electricity on the train was shut off, causing his braking system to ignition. So that happened, and the train started coming to a stop. Now, another oncoming train also at the same time reported, guess what? An electrical power outage. Because of the large load of the train, it took nearly 2 full miles for the train to come to a complete stop near the town of Paintsville. That's right, Paintsville. Here's where things got really strange. The crews on board the train saw strange lights hovering over them. They both reported the lights were coming from metallic objects flying in the sky, which appeared to have searchlights on them and reflected off a nearby river. The crews then discovered parts of one of the trains had been damaged all along its side, where something tore into the metal. The incident was reported, here's where it really gets weird. The incident was reported in what's called the Bluegrass Triangle. No, it's not musical, folks. It's an area which stretches through the heart of Kentucky into parts of Ike's favorite area, Tennessee. Reportedly, it's known for something Ike called a UFO blitz, which sounds like a drink at a college bar. But that blitz was documented in a 1978 newspaper article. Legend has it to this day, this area is known for UFO activity and paranormal happenings, folks, in the middle of the Bluegrass Triangle. You heard of that, Ike?
No, but I think we all appreciated the fact that you were telling a story where you would say something absolutely crazy, and then you would say, now here's where it gets crazy.
Well, that's the whole catch here. Because they just get crazier and crazier. Bluegrass Triangle, UFO blitz, train crashing into a UFO. You can't make this stuff up.
Although it is interesting that, I'd never thought about this before, but the idea of why don't we hear about more run-ins between trains and UFOs? I'm not making a joke. It seems like, I've never thought about that, but that seems like there would be an active area of encounters, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it could very well be, especially in something called the Bluegrass Triangle. If you got a band out there, you're looking for a name, ding, 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 there you go. All right, Ike, how Ape Canyon got its name. That's right. That's the headline of the story. Next story comes to us from a slate.com blog. Ike, are you familiar with Ape Canyon in Washington State?
Believe it or not, I think I am, but
wow.
Tell me, give me the details. Fill me in.
Okay. The location is a narrowing gorge northeast of Mount St. Helens. Why is it called Ape Canyon, you might ask? Well, my friends, this is the site of one of the most famous Bigfoot attacks in cryptozoological history. That's right. And that's no small term. You don't say that unless you've got something really substantial. Listen to this. The event, which was documented in a newspaper story, then ran in Washington and Oregon. It's said to have taken place in July of 1924 when a small group of miners reported staying in a summer cabin that came under attack by a gang of wild ape men. That's right. An eyewitness account from a man named Fred Beck. No, I don't know if he's relations to the Beck, but anyway, Fred said that a group of hairy hooligans began throwing huge stones on the cabin in the dark of the night, and the siege continued until morning, Ike. At one point, as the Sasquatches tried to invade the place, they were fended off by an axe and rifles. In fact, Beck claims during the attack, he managed to get a shot off at one of the creatures, watching it tumble below into the canyon. Beck went on to write a book on the event, that's right, calling the creatures extra-dimensional beings. Why not? Later theories explain the creatures as possibly a group of teens whose voices were amplified by the canyon echoes. Maybe there was some alcohol involved, but that's one explanation. However, Ike, Ape Canyon's features were dramatically changed with the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens, but it still remains to this day a popular hiking destination. Ape Canyon. Book your ticket now.
And this is where it really gets crazy. I actually, believe it or not, I remember, if you remember the olden days when they would have like summer movie fests for kids out of school, and you could go pay $1 to go see some 16 millimeter, failed film or something. I actually remember there was a documentary about the Ape Canyon thing way back then. And I, believe it or not, I actually think that was one of the first things that ever got me interested in this whole area. So it is interesting to hear about that again. That's
right. Could it be Bigfoot attacking the cabin or a group of drunk teenagers? You make the decision. That's the story for tonight. All right, folks. Ike, that pretty much wraps up this show. We've got our next guest on deck, folks, standing by. We'll be back with another show just in a few minutes if you're watching us on Facebook Live. Ike, you want to tell them about our YouTube channel?
Y'all, we have a YouTube channel. It's called The Road Beyond Podcast. We upload pretty much everything weekly. So you'll get 2 episodes every week. It's a good place to catch up on stuff if you missed it live on YouTube.
Also, you're watching us on our Facebook page. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you follow it and like it. You can catch us on Twitter at Road_Beyond. We're on there. And all social media as The Road Beyond Podcast. I'm Todd Duplantis.
I'm not.
And you will be back next time. Thanks for watching, folks. Facebook Live. We'll be back with a new episode in a few minutes. We'll see you all next time on The Road Beyond.